Assalamu alaikum everyone, this is Ayman Nazir and welcome back to Knowledge Realm. Students, we are studying pre-partition history of Pakistan and Alhamdulillah we have covered the pre-partition history of Pakistan from 1857 to 1935. We have covered all the events that occurred in this time period, and the source of these lectures is the book Trek to Pakistan by Ahmed Said. And today, students, we are going to cover a very important topic, that is the Government of India Act 1935. We will cover this lecture in detail just like all the other lectures that we have covered in the past. So stay focused and let's get started. Starting with the introduction, brief introduction of the Government of India Act 1935. Students, this act was actually presented to be the Constitution of India. It was supposed to be the Constitution of India in 1935. It was the outcome of the three roundtable conferences that were held in London from 1930 to 1932. So this was the direct outcome of the three roundtable conferences. A white paper based on the recommendations of the roundtable conferences was published, and a committee chaired by the Viceroy Lord Linlithgow was appointed. And the report of the committee, report of the Simon Commission were the sources to create the Government of India Act 1935. But students, about this act, about this constitution, Maulvi A.K. Fazlul Haq said, thus the act ensured neither the Muslim Raj nor the Hindu Raj, but the British Raj. But why he said so? What was so deplorable in this act? Well, students, this is what we're going to study in the next few slides. I'll explain it in detail. Students, before starting the detailed study of the Government of India Act 1935, I would like to recall all the events that led to the formation of this Act of 1935. I would like to give a quick review of the historical events of the past few years. If you want to study all these events in detail, you can definitely go to my channel and the playlist Pakistan Affairs, and you can find detailed lectures on these topics. I've explained Montego-Chelmsford reforms. There is a complete lecture on this topic. Then I've explained Simon Commission in another lecture. If you want to study these in detail, you can definitely go to my lecture and make understanding of these events. But here I would just give a brief recall of all these events to make sense, to make good understanding of the Government of India Act of 1935. Students, starting with the Montego-Chelmsford reforms. In 1919, these reforms were introduced in India. Students, we have studied in the previous lectures that British government was introducing reforms in India. First, it gave the Minto-Morley reforms of 1909, then there were Montego-Chelmsford reforms in 1919, and then it introduced Government of India Act of 1935. These all were the constitutional reforms in India. So in 1919, Montego-Chelmsford reforms were introduced in India, and in these reforms a new system of government was introduced, which was called diarchy. Now this diarchy means that the division of powers. Diarchy was introduced at provincial level, and the subjects that were given to provincial government were further divided into two. These subjects were divided into reserved subjects and transferred subjects. Reserved subjects were reserved with the Indian government, with the Indian civil service, British government, and the transferred subjects were transferred to the provincial ministry. So this was the system of diarchy, and this is how British kept the government at provincial level in its hands by the help of reserved subjects. Alright, then students, in 1927, a commission was appointed, Simon Commission. The main task of this commission was assessing the performance of the reforms, Montego-Chelmsford reforms, in these 8 years. And another task was the introduction of new constitutional reforms in India. Then students, this commission presented its report. Simon Commission presented its report, but the report was rejected by Indians. Then students, Lord Birkenhead, who was the Secretary of State at the time of India, he challenged Indians. He gave a challenge to Indians that if you're not satisfied with the constitution prepared by British, why don't you people make your own constitution? So he said very satirically that Indians should make their own unanimous constitution. Then students, Indian leaders took this challenge very seriously and they got together to constitute a constitution for India. Then student, Nehru Report was presented in 1928. This was actually a kind of constitution for India. But the report was rejected by All India Muslim League because the report very explicitly showed that it is indifferent towards the Muslims of India. So the report got rejected by All India Muslim League and then 14 points of Qaid came in India. Qaid Muhammad Ali Jinnah presented these points, but these points were also rejected by Congress. Then students, there appeared a deadlock in India. So British government announced in 1930 that we should hold some conferences in London. Then the 3 roundtable conferences held in London where all the political leaders of India were invited to London to discuss the political issues of India and to formulate a working constitution for Indian people. Then students, this Government of India Act 1930 is the outcome of these roundtable conferences. So this was all the path that India covered to make this constitution, that is Government of India Act 1935, and in the next slides we would study this act in detail. Done with the background, now we're going to start with the important salient features of the Government of India Act 1935. Of course, we cannot study the entire act here, but we would definitely discuss the important salient features of this act. I have enlisted these here. First of all, student, it was decided that India would be a federation. Then the subjects were divided into 3 lists. First, it was federal list, provincial list, and concurrent list. Another important salient features was the autonomy of provinces. Provinces were granted with the autonomy. Then diarchy was introduced at the center government. Then a legislature was introduced and it was bicameral legislature. Then establishment of the Federal Court, the Federal Railway Authority, Reserve Bank of India and the Federal Public Service Commission. Then separate electorates were granted to minorities except untouchables. Then Indian Council was abolished in this Act of 1935. Then students, the very important and main feature of this Government Act was that this act gave unlimited powers to provincial governors and the Governor General also. We would discuss these salient features. Starting with the first important salient feature of the Government of India Act. Students, in first roundtable conference in which Congress did not take part, it was decided that India should be a federation. All the people present in that roundtable conference made consensus and they decided that yes, India should be a federation. Now what is a federation? Students, federation or federal form of a state is a kind of a state in which the government is divided at 2 levels. First, there is a central level and then provincial government. There is a government at the center and the separate units that we call provinces, they do have their government also. There's a provincial government also. Central government also do legislation and execution of the subjects that are of common interest to the entire country. And provincial government, its role is doing the legislation and execution of the subjects that are given to provinces only. For example, students' health, education, and these are the subjects of a province. A province can handle these subjects. I mean, if there is a provincial government, the provincial government would be given the subject of health and education, and it is the provincial government that would take care of the health department and the education department of the respective province. For example, in Sindh government would take care of the health department and education department of the Sindh province. Then there are some subjects that are common, that are of common interest for entire nation. For example, foreign policy, foreign affairs. Now, the separate provinces cannot make legislation and execution on this subject, foreign policy. They cannot run this. So it's the central government that takes care of this department. Alright, then trade and commerce and these kind of subjects are definitely given to central government. So this is the role of federal form of a state. The government is divided into two, that is central government and provincial government. There are some subjects of central government and some subjects of provincial government. So it was decided in first roundtable conference that India would be a federation because India consists of many provinces. Alright. So the government was divided at the two level, that is federal government and provincial government. India would be a federation. We have started this. Now, how the Government of India Act divides the subjects among federal government and provincial government? Well, three lists were presented. The subjects were divided into three lists. First, it was the federal list that was given to the federal government, then provincial list that enlisted all the subjects that were given to provinces. Then there was another list that was called concurrent list. Students, it is very easy to understand that definitely the subjects enlisted in the federal list would come under federal government, and provincial government can never intervene in those subjects. Alright, and the provincial list was given to provinces, and it was decided that provinces would be legislating and executing these subjects. So federal government cannot intervene in the subjects given to provincial government. Alright, so these two lists were explicit and there was no confusion in that. But students, there was another list that was called concurrent list. And in the act, it was stated that both the provincial government and federal government can legislate on the subjects that were enlisted in the concurrent list. Both the government, that is provincial government and federal government, both can legislate here, right? But what would happen if a conflict arises and if the issue is not resolved? Well, in that case, the decision of federal government would prevail. Right? It was decided that whatever federal government decides would be the last decision. So we can say that concurrent list was majorly the subjects of federal government. Veto was in hands of federal government. Alright. Then students, another important salient feature was that provincial autonomy. Students, we have studied the 14 points of Qaid Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and in that we studied that Qaid Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah demanded more autonomy for provinces. Why he demanded autonomy for provinces? Because we studied that in Montego-Chelmsford reforms, diarchy was introduced at provincial level, and the provincial ministries were not given the subjects completely. There were some subjects that were reserved by the British government, and provincial minister did not have much power. So provinces were not autonomous. And Qaid Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah demanded this thing in 14 points. So in Government of India Act 1935, provinces were given autonomy. In Urdu, we call it Subai Khud Mukhtari. So this was Subai Khud Mukhtari. And it was provincial autonomy. It says that the central government could not intervene in the laws made by provincial government on the subjects enlisted in provincial list. Provinces were given a list that was called provincial list, and now provinces were allowed and free to legislate on these subjects. Moreover, diarchy was discontinued at provincial level, and all the subjects of provinces were given to ministries, provincial ministries. There were no reserved subjects anymore at provincial level. All the subjects were given to provinces. But students, here, once again, British played very well. The governor of the provinces were given more powers. They had unlimited powers. Just like the Governor General of India. We would study this in the next slide. Maintenance of law and order in the provinces was under the governor of the province. Protection of the state employees, protection of rights of minorities. So this is how British played. It removed the diarchy at the provincial level, but it increased the powers of governor. It snatched powers from the ministries and it gave powers to the governor of provinces. So this is how British played, and these things were noticed by the Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He read between the lines and he understood that how British played with Indians in the Government of India Act 1935. Now students, diarchy was abolished at provinces, but it was introduced at center. In Montego Chelmsford reforms, the subjects were divided at the provincial level, and at the provincial level, British government snatched some subjects from the provincial ministries and kept it with themselves. Now here, government did the same thing, but at the central level. Now it shows that British was so adamant at this, and they did not want to give powers to Indians. And that's the thing they were demanding. That's the thing Indians were demanding. They wanted powers. But British was not ready to do so. Here I have designed a very interesting diagram. Here is the government, and it was decided that India would be a federation. So here is the federation. Central government and the provincial government. Okay? The provincial subjects would be under ministries, provincial ministries, but at central government, at the level of central government, diarchy was introduced. Diarchy means the subjects were divided into two: reserved subjects and transferred subjects. Transferred subjects were transferred to the ministries, and reserved subjects were kept to Governor General. Governor General reserved these subjects, and no Indian could intervene in working of these reserved subjects. These were reserved by the British government, means by the Governor General of India, who was a British, obviously. So this is how once again British played and tried to keep power with themselves in India. They were just trying to fool Indians, but Indians had learned already how British play with them in India. So Indians were not ready to be fooled once again in India. Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah understood very well, the leaders of Congress understood very well what government is trying to do, what British is trying to do. So this was the system of diarchy that was introduced at the central government level, at the level of central government in India. Then it was decided that the legislature of India would be bicameral. There would be an upper house and there would be a lower house, upper house and a lower house. Upper house was called Council of State and it consisted of 260 members, and the lower house was called the Assembly, and it was decided that there would be 375 members of the lower house. It was decided that the president and vice president of both the house would be selected by the members of these house. But students, once again, there were unlimited powers given to Governor General. Governor General could sack the president at any time. Governor General was given the power to summon and adjourn the assembly at any time. Moreover, Governor General was given the power to dissolve the assembly at any time. Another thing, it was the assent of Governor General that was required by the Assembly to implement a bill, to make a bill, the act in India. It was the assent of Governor General. Another thing, Governor General was authorized to amend the Indian Act, the Government of India Act. No other person, Assembly in no way was authorized to amend the Constitution. So it was just a set of rules imposed on Indians. I hope you all are making very good understanding what I'm trying to say here. Bicameral legislature was introduced, but the powers of this legislature were very much limited, and most of the powers were given to Governor General of India. Government of India Act established the Federal Court also. The jurisdiction of the Federal Court was the British India and the states. And states means princely states. These states were not part of British India. So we would write it separately. The court was to consist of the Chief Justice and 6 judges. And the main aim of this court was the resolution of dispute arising between the states, provinces, or between the states and federal government. Students, this court was authorized to interpret the constitution and to make sure that the provinces and center acted only within those spheres which are reserved for them under the constitution. The federal court was also empowered to advise the Governor General on constitutional matters. But here, once again, the Governor General was the supreme authority. Governor General was authorized to accept or reject the advices by the federal court. It was the sole authority and power of this person, Governor General, the Lord Governor General. Federal Railway Authority was established. It was established to run the affairs of the railway in India. It was free from the control of ministers of government level or central level or provincial level, and it directly reported to the Governor General. Okay, so Federal Railway Authority also comes under the authority of Governor General. Then a Reserve Bank for India was established and a Federal Public Service Commission. The Reserve Bank was created to oversee the nation's currency and credit, and reorganization and structuring of provinces was also done by the help of this Government of India Act. Sindh was finally separated from Bombay, and this is very important to keep in mind for the objective portion of the exam. If the examiner asks you that when Sindh was separated from Bombay, you should reply that in 1935. Then Bihar and Orissa, these were 2 provinces and these were separated in 1935. Then students, Burma, that was part of India before 1935. It was separated in 1935, and it was the Government of India Act 1935 that made this separation possible. The Burma Act was passed in 1937, and in 1937 the Burma was officially separated and considered as a new colony of British Empire. Then students, minorities except the untouchables were given the right of separate electorates. We studied this in the Communal Award also, that in Communal Award that was passed in Roundtable Conference 2nd, and this award gave the right of separate electorates to the minorities and depressed classes of India. Now student, the most interesting and important part of the Government of India Act 1935, powers of Governor General. Now make your good concentration here, because this is very important, and this is the main thing that was not liked by the Indians. Indians abhorred this Government of India Act just because of this salient feature of the act, powers of Governor General. And Qaid Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah also did not like this act just because of the powers, unlimited powers of Governor General. Students, the Governor General of India was given unlimited powers. Maintenance of law and order in India, safeguarding the legitimate rights of minorities, safeguarding the public servants and their rights, checking the discriminatory taxes against British goods, and safeguarding the rights of Indian states. All these things were under the authority, were in the jurisdiction of Governor General of India. This is how British played. British gave Indians the constitution, and that's the thing that Indians wanted. But British tried to keep all the powers in the hands of the British government itself. Then the things that I've enlisted here, these are the things that the Governor General was not even bound by advice of his council on these things that I've enlisted here. Governor General could appoint and sack the council of ministers, and he did not need any advice. Then Governor General could issue ordinances. Then amendment of the Constitution. I've explained it in the previous slides that students, no procedure of amendment of Constitution through the Assembly was explained or given in the Constitution. There was no way to amend the Constitution by the help of the Assembly or the members of Assembly. The members of Assembly could do nothing about the Constitution. It was just a set of rules and regulation for themselves that they were expected and supposed to follow. The amendment of Constitution was just the right and power of the Governor General. Similarly, the suspension of Constitution was also the right of Governor General. Governor General could suspend the Constitution. Summoning and adjourning the session of Central Legislature was also the right of this Governor General, and he could also dissolve the Assembly at any time he wanted. So, are you guys understanding that how British is trying to play with Indians, keeping all the powers with itself? Governor General could interfere in provincial matters. It could disallow the debate on any bill in the assemblies. It could send back the already approved bills to the assemblies for further discussions. Bills were also at the mercy of Governor General. The assembly could do nothing but just pray for the approval of the bills that they introduce. Then approving and the appointment and dismissal of the President of the Assembly was also the right of Governor General. Moreover, no tax could be levied without the assent of Governor General. He had complete jurisdiction over 80% of the country's budget. So, all these powers make an image of an autocrat in mind. The Governor General was actually given all the powers, and it feels like that there was an autocrat in India who was called Governor General. And students, does it not feel like that this Constitution of India is actually trying to make India an authoritarian regime? We cannot call this a constitution. In fact, rather it was just some compilation of rules and regulations, and it made India an authoritarian regime. Then students, the Indian Council that was created as a result of the Act of 1855 was abolished in the Government of India Act 1935. It was a kind of council that assisted the Secretary of State in the discharge of his duties. But the Government of India Act reduced the powers of Secretary of State, and it gave all the powers to the Governor General of India. Secretary of the State was empowered to appoint not less than 3 and not more than 6 advisors, and it was just like a committee, a small committee that is of advisory nature. This act abolished the Indian Council, and it reduced the powers of Secretary of State, and it gave all the powers to Governor General of India. Now students, let's see how the people of India reacted on this act, on this authoritative kind of act? Students, the Indians' reaction was very much justified, and as it should have been, Indians rejected the act. The entire India, and from entire India I mean Hindus, Sikh, Muslims, everybody rejected the act. Leaders of Congress and Muslim League were dissatisfied with this act, and the act could not come up to the expectations of any community in India, so they rejected this act. But still, the act was enforced. All India Muslim League deplored the enforcement of the act despite the disapproval of all political parties of the country. Pandit Nehru equated the act with a machine having strong brakes but no engine. Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah denounced the act in the following words. He said that this act is thoroughly rotten, fundamentally bad, and totally unacceptable. And Maulvi A.K. Fazlul Haq said this: the act ensured neither the Muslim Raj nor the Hindu Raj, but the British Raj. Now you people can understand that why Maulvi A.K. Fazlul Haq said something like this on this Government of India Act. I showed this quote at the beginning of this lecture, and I said that I will explain this later, that why Maulvi A.K. Fazlul Haq deplored this act and why he said so. Now all of you can make understandings that how this act tried to ensure British Raj in India. But students, Indian leaders were wise enough to understand the intentions of British government. So they rejected this act, but still British government enforced this act and made this act the Constitution of India. Okay students, so we have studied the Government of India Act of 1935 in detail. Now let's do a brief analysis of the act. Students, we have realized now that this act was actually not a real constitution. It was not a constitution for India, although British government claimed that yes, this is a kind of constitution that the British government has designed for India, but it was not a constitution kind of thing. In fact, it was just the imposition of the compilation of rules and regulations on Indians. It was another effort to prevent the powers from going into the hands of Indians. British wanted to keep all the powers with themselves. So this is the reason that all the powers were given to Governor General of India and the provincial governors of India. This is the reason that British introduced diarchy at the central level of government. Indians were given the representation in the assemblies, but not the powers to legislate or to execute. We have studied the 14 points of Quaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and students, there we studied that Quaid-e-Azam demanded the representation of Indians in assemblies and he demanded the representation of Muslims. Now here, the British government, it was very cunning. It tried to play with the words. It said, yes, we are giving representation to the Indians in the assemblies, but what he did to counter this demand, that the government snatched all the powers from the members of assemblies. The power was given to Governor General. And how it snatched all the powers from the members of the assemblies? Well, we have studied in the previous slides in detail that the British government introduced a concurrent list. And on concurrent list, the veto power was in the hands of federal government. Moreover, it introduced diarchy at the center. There were some subjects that were given to the ministers, some were reserved with the British government, and the Governor General was the person who could rule, who could legislate on the subjects. So these were all the tools to keep the power in hands of government. Then Indians assembly members were not given any power to amend the constitution. It was the Governor General only who could amend the constitution. So it shows that yes, Indians were given the representation in the assemblies, but not the powers in the assemblies. Almost all the powers were given to Governor General and provincial governors. Federal and provincial legislature could not function properly because it was the Governor General whose assent was required for a bill to reach the level of a legitimate act. They needed the assent of Governor General. After presenting a bill, all they could do was they could pray. So students, these all were the things that further infuriated Indians. What Indians demanded was not given to Indians in this Government of India Act 1935. It came after the struggle of a very long time, the Nehru Report, the 14 points of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, then the roundtable conferences, but this outcome of all this effort could not fulfill the dreams of Indians, could not come up to the expectations of Indians, and it infuriated Indians. Indians rejected this Government of India Act 1935. So students, this was all about the Government of India Act 1935. Today we studied this topic and we studied it in detail. I hope that everything about this topic, related to this topic, is clear in mind of all the listeners and all the students, and most importantly, CSS aspirants. I tried to make it simple, easy for all of you, because students, when something is easy, it is very easy to memorize and keep that thing in mind. So this was just my effort. This is the end of today's lecture. I hope you all got it very well. And in the next lecture, we're going to discuss a very interesting topic, that is Congress ministries. So till then, stay focused on your studies, stay focused on your goals. Thank you, Allah Hafiz, and don't forget to subscribe the channel Knowledge Realm.